welcome to the Badass Breastfeeding Podcast. It's Dianne, your lactation consultant.
And I'm Abby, the Badass Breastfeeder. And you can head to badassbreastfeedingpodcast.com where you will find all kinds of things like all of our other episodes, which there are over 400, and our favorite resources page and information about scheduling your very own one-on-one online lactation consultation with Dianne and our sponsor page. Yes. Check out the sponsor page if you ever need anything. See if you can give them any of your business because they make this podcast possible. And also send us your screenshots of reviews that you leave around the internet, like on iTunes or Spotify. There's stars, however you're able to do it. Send us a screenshot to badassbreastfeedingpodcast@gmail.com and we'll send you a little goodie bag of stickers and thank you for nursing in public cards. Which is really fun. And we're still on Patreon. We'll be on Patreon for 2025. And we would love to see you over there where we're getting to know everybody pretty well.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have our monthly Zoom hangouts and we have our weekly wellness checks where we just kind of talk about what's going on in our lives. And sometimes it's breastfeeding related. Sometimes it's completely not at all. So check out the link at the top of the show notes, wherever you're listening from. And also you can find that at badassbreastfeedingpodcast.com. But click the link and you can look at the different tiers and see if one looks good to you. And that's all. Dianne has our review of the week.
Yes. And it says, absolutely loving this podcast as a first-time mom. No one told me how challenging breastfeeding would be and how different each week and stage would be. I'm currently 4 months postpartum and run to this podcast for almost every challenge we face and try to stay off the dreaded Google. I had a pretty traumatic birth and was being told we needed to supplement and bottle feed. I'm glad I stuck to my guns and continued to latch the baby. From hospital staff rules, in quotes, to oversupply and reflux to latch challenges and distracted feeding, I've learned so much and have also been able to lean into my own intuition with the information I take from these ladies. Would recommend to all moms wishing to pursue a breastfeeding journey and have told several friends to give it a listen.
Aww.
So I know there's so much in this. So thank you so much for sharing the podcast too. That really means a lot to us when people share it with friends and with other people that are having babies and maybe are having breastfeeding problems or just breastfeeding and need the support, because who doesn't need the support, you know? But I love how she is talking about here, like leaning into her own intuition. And I think that is just so important because it's so like you have a baby and then you're like, oh my God, am I doing this right? Is everything okay? Are they getting what they need? But once you start feeling more confident, you really lean into your intuition and you start trusting the process. Things are so much easier.
Yeah. I mean, it's so true. And that's the thing. I mean, like those things that make you feel uncomfortable or you're like, this doesn't feel right. Like you are getting those messages for a reason. Like we, innately know how to parent, but us as conscious beings are just like not connected to that anymore. And we get all kinds of messages and weird things that interrupt that living in this society. So yeah, being able to listen to that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I know. It's pretty great. So thank you so much for sending that in to us. And then that also, when she says here that breastfeeding can be different each week, we're going to kind of talk a little bit about that today when we talk about babies being fussy at the breast. And that is because sometimes your baby is fine at the breast, one feeding, and then the next feeding, they're fussy. And you're like, oh my God, what is going on? Why are they being fussy? Are they not getting enough milk? Are they getting too much milk? What is happening? And we're going to talk a little bit about why that can happen today.
Cool. Because that happens a lot.
It does happen a lot.
If babies popping on and off the breast, I think people are like, what's happening?
Yeah.
They're just kind of on and off and fussy. They won't latch properly. They won't settle. It's unsettling.
Very unsettling. Yes, it is. It feels like unnatural almost because it's like, well, aren't they just supposed to go there and go on and not give me a problem?
Yeah. It just feels like something's wrong.
Exactly. And it's not. There's different reasons why this happens. So, and different reasons too, depending on how old your baby is, because babies do different things for different reasons. And as they get older, you run into things like distraction and teething and stuff like that. But when they're younger, things like reflux can come into play. So babies, reflux is pretty normal. And I think we've got an episode on reflux. I'm sure we do, out of the whole 400 and something episodes we have. But reflux is really normal. And, it just depends on how your baby reacts to reflux. It can be more severe in some babies. It could be, less severe. But that sphincter muscle between the stomach and the esophagus is pretty weak when babies are born, just like all their other muscular, their whole system is just weak when they're born, right?
Yeah.
So everything needs to strengthen up. And that milk, they get a belly full of milk and you lay them down, it can come up, it can be uncomfortable. So reflux is something, we feed our babies in like a laying down position when they're feeding. So some babies, that reflux can really bother them quite a bit when they're feeding.
It's like if you were eating laying down. That feels terrible.
Right. It just doesn't seem like natural. It is, but it isn't, at the same time.
Yeah.
So if your baby is having some reflux, they definitely might be fussy and wanting to sit up. And, and I see this too with babies like right after a feeding. Like sometimes right after a feeding, the parent will hold the baby in their arms, like cradle them in their arms. And the baby's like super fussy. And they're like, are they still hungry? Did they not get enough to eat? And I'm like, put them upright. And as soon as they do that, the baby's fine. So it really can just determine, like how your baby is reacting to this reflux. So if it is a reflux situation with your baby, that's why they're fussy when they're feeding. All you need to do is really just switch their position, put them in more of an upright position. And that can really help them a lot. Put them where they're a little bit more at an angle instead of laying flat. And that can really help them stay a lot more comfortable. And you might not run into that fussiness while they're feeding.
Cool. It's like paced bottle feeding.
Exactly.
You want them to be upright a little more.
Yeah. So
Which seems
that can
weird
also
for a baby. It's like my baby can't sit up. They should be laying down. But no, you're there. You're supposed to hold them up a little bit. You're supposed to be holding them.
Yeah. So it can really help them. And that's really like, if your baby is not having any fussiness or whatever, just keep feeding them the way they are. But if your baby is struggling with some reflux, if the pediatrician said, oh, your baby's got reflux, then, this could be something. And of course, things are more exacerbated when babies are tired too.
Yeah.
So when they're tired, they can be more fussy. And you might find during like that, what they call like the witching hour, that is during the time where your baby, that time of day when your baby is really fussy. And you might think like, oh, if I just breastfeed them, they'll be better. But some babies won't even go to the breast during that time. They're so fussy. And that is really normal. That is really normal. And I know it's weird for me to say that it's like, oh yeah, your baby's so fussy that nothing will calm them down. That's normal. Like it really is, because they're just miserable during that time of day.
It's usually like early evening.
Usually like early evening.
It's just like a time where they're tired, they're fussy. I don't even know why.
They're miserable. They're overstimulated. Yeah. They're overstimulated from the day. You might notice that this happens more, or they're worse on days where you are out with the baby, or you've had visitors, or, you've had doctor's appointments or something like that. Maybe they had shots that day, like something like that. They might be more fussy. Usually you see that witching hour when they're littler, like 2 weeks to like 8 weeks or something like that. 2 weeks to 6 weeks, somewhere in there. You'll see that really fussy behavior during that witching hour. That is just so common. And if you're trying to nurse your baby during that time and they're fussy, just keep in mind that they're probably not hungry. They're just fussy. And try doing some skin to skin with them. Try baby wearing. Another thing that really works well is if you have a yoga ball and you can like sit on the yoga ball and kind of bounce with your baby. They really like that repetitive motion. So
that's good
really
for your
help.
pelvic floor too, and your abdominal muscles to
I know it's
to sit
good
on one
for
of
your
those
abdominal
balls
muscles, but
because because you have to kind of tighten everything in order to remain on it without falling off.
Oh, I never thought about it like that.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's a good
maybe I
idea.
should get one. My pelvic floor is shot.
I know. I always think about that. I'm like, we have one. And I'm like, I'm going to sit on this all day. I never do.
And Abby never does it.
I never do.
Yeah. But it can be really helpful. So if you have one, sit on it with the baby and do a little bit of repetitive bouncing. And that can be really, really, really helpful because it is just better. It is just like they just really enjoy that. They calm down pretty easily with that. So just, sit there, watch TV while you're bouncing something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Positioning. So babies might be fussy if they don't like the position they're in. Babies are comfortable in certain positions, it really, and this is more of like a newborn thing, where some babies are more comfortable in certain positions. As babies get older and their muscles are stretching out a little bit more and they're starting to, be a little bit more comfortable just being here on the planet, you might notice that less. But for newborns, it is like it can be really uncomfortable if they are in positions that are painful for them or just, discomfort overall. And then how are you supposed to eat when you're not comfortable?
Right. And that's just the process of being born. Like you're coming out, the babies are being squeezed out of the tiniest hole and they're getting smashed. Their shoulders are getting smashed. Their spines are getting smashed. And then they're just like, there can be certain situations where like their baby's fussy when they're laying on their right side, but not fussy when they're laying on their left side. And then it's like, oh no, you go to, you're like, oh, something's wrong. And this is people kind of profit off of this too, right? They're like, oh, your baby needs chiropractor, your baby needs this. It's not necessarily the case. I mean, that's just sort of what happens during birth. And it's not always a problem. I mean, certainly if it's affecting feeding, which I think can happen with like tightness in the jaw or something.
Tightness in the jaw, tightness in the neck. Yeah. Collarbones.
So if it's affecting, But sometimes babies just need to be comfortable while they're getting through these kind of newborn first weeks.
Absolutely. And you'll know because like maybe your baby will feed fine on, like Abby said, they're laying on their left side and they're fine. You switch them to their right side to feed them on the other breast and they're just not latching well. They're fussy. They're on and off the breast. They're not staying latched for a feeding. That could be that they're uncomfortable in that position. So put them back on the side that they like and put them in a different, put them like in football hold on that other breast. Just keep them on the side that they like. Now, some people will say, well, isn't it bad to feed your baby in the same position all the time? No, that's okay. You can feed your baby in the same position all the time. And like we just said, babies, as they grow, things get more stretched out, things get more comfortable for them. One of the things that you can do to help them stretch out those muscles a little bit, like Abby said, you can do chiropractic, you can do stuff like that, but you could also just do like tummy time. And when you're doing tummy time with your baby, and that's something that you should be doing anyway, because babies need that time on their belly. But for brand newborn babies, you can just put them on your chest and babies will look up and look around and they're moving their neck and they're moving those muscles around. And that can be really helpful. So do some of that, do some tummy time with your baby, get them stretched out a little bit. You can do little massages to their jaw. That can be really helpful. If you've seen a lactation consultant and it's been noted like, oh, your baby's really tight, then definitely do some of those little exercises, do some tummy time, and that should help. But it's okay to put your baby in the same position if that's where they're comfortable feeding.
Yeah. It's not gymnastics. It's breastfeeding.
Right. But I remember hearing that, like people being like, but if they're in the same position, they're not going to drain the breast and da-da-da. Like, no, that's not the case.
No, they drain the breast.
They should be able to drain the breast regardless of what position they're in. And if they're not, then they're not feeding well.
Right.
So it's totally fine. They can stay in the same position. I don't think I ever switched my baby's position. Like from the day they were born. I think they stayed in the same position all the time.
I never thought about that. I mean, yeah. They should be able to drain the breast in any position that they're comfortable in.
Exactly. Yeah.
And if they're not, if they're not feeding well and they seem uncomfortable, but they're comfortable in a different position, then that works. Do it.
Yeah, just do it. Just do it. But yeah, however you guys are comfortable in. We've had messages from people that have said my baby will only feed lying down. In the side lying position. Like some babies really are particular about where they are, and they will be fussy if you try to put them in any other kind of position.
Yeah.
So really that could be, it's just fussiness, and just kind of follow your baby's lead as much as you can. Now, if you have a baby that will only feed in side lying, that can be difficult when you're out, obviously.
Yeah.
But you find ways to make things work. So.
Yeah. I mean, and it's just a phase. Like that'll change. Like that's just in the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. And that'll change. Like Abby said, that'll change. Now, when your baby's a little bit older, and this could probably be for those younger babies too, but I mean, so if your baby doesn't want to eat, they might be fussy at the breast. You don't get that as much with a newborn because newborns are like always feeding. Yeah. But if your baby is a little bit older and they're maybe distracted or they're stretching out their feedings, then you might get a baby that you're trying to latch them and they're fussy. So this is where feeding on demand comes into play. So if you're feeding on demand, which is what we always recommend doing, then you're going to be like, okay, the baby doesn't want to eat right now. If you're somebody who is like really kind of scheduling their feeds and you're like, okay, I feed the baby every 3 hours, the baby's feeding, and you go and try to latch the baby every 3 hours and your baby is stretching out feeds or your baby isn't in the mood to eat at that 3 hour mark, or they're more tired and they don't want to eat, they're playing, they're distracted, whatever there is going on, they're not going to latch. So watching for babies' cues and knowing what those cues are is really going to be helpful, because feeding on demand, you're not going to run into that problem as much. You're not going to go, oh my gosh, why is the baby not latching?
Right.
Because a lot of people who
you won't even know.
You won't even know it. And if you're feeding more of a schedule, which just sometimes just happens because people say, oh, feed your baby every 2 to 3 hours. Feed your baby every 2 to 3 hours. You hear that when the babies are babies. Yeah. And then as they get a little bit older, like that's all that's in your brain is feed the baby every 2 to 3 hours, feed the baby every 2 to 3 hours. But babies, they change it up. Like they can stretch it. They start to stretch it out. They're distracted and don't want to eat. And sometimes people take this as a nursing strike. And then it becomes a mess, because then it's like, okay, then the baby didn't eat. When I tried to feed them at the breast, they were fussy. So I gave them a bottle instead because it had been 3 hours and they needed to eat. So I gave them a bottle, which means that then, and of course the baby's taking the bottle, right?
Right. Because they can't not.
Right. So they take the bottle and then they try to put him back to the breast again and next feed, and the baby's not doing it. It becomes this cycle.
Yeah. So that's a spiral.
It does become a spiral, and it can be really frustrating to kind of break that spiral. So feeding on demand from the start is one of the ways to kind of avoid a lot of that stuff, and following your baby's cues is really important.
Yeah. And if you go to the doctor's office and they're like, well, we need to know how often the baby eats, which is how people get involved in these apps and stuff, because the doctor will ask, like, how often does the baby eat? You just say the baby eats on demand. And if they demand an answer, then make it up. Say every 2 hours. Just make it up, because they just don't know this part of it. And they're going to say all kinds of things to you that are going to get you all confused and worried. When I never had an answer. How often does baby? I don't know.
Yeah.
All the time. They're constantly latched on all the time.
When I see families, I do ask too. And because it is part of like the questions, of things that you ask, because you're trying to determine what's going on, especially if it's a weight gain issue.
Yeah.
And you do ask, but I love it. And I tell families, if they say, oh God, I really don't know, I'm kind of like, we're feeding on demand, then I'm like, you know what? That's fantastic. Like, it's totally fine that you're doing that, because that is the way we want them to eat. We want them to just follow the baby's cues. And when I get families that do that, I always make sure they know that that is a really beneficial way to feed your baby. Because you want them to just feed when they want to feed.
I know that we don't need to take a break, but I once again forgot that I have messages.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So maybe we could take like a small break and just like visit our message board.
Yeah.
I don't know why I keep forgetting. I'm really good at getting the messages and having them on hand, but I'm really bad at remembering to read them. Okay. So I am a full-time mom and 12 days postpartum. I had a friend tell me to start pumping right away, and I should have researched before taking her word. When my milk came in, I felt so engorged that I felt okay to do it. I felt okay to pump because she was so engorged. I've been pumping after the first morning feed and after the last feed before bed. I just listened to you in a podcast and you said, don't pump for the first 2 weeks. What do I do now? I don't want an oversupply. Do I just stop?
Yeah.
So she can just stop.
She can just stop. Yeah.
Okay.
She can just stop.
There you go.
Unless she wants to save that milk, I mean, I don't think pumping once after the morning feed and once after the night feed or once after the last feed of the day, like, I don't think that's going to cause like this crazy oversupply. But she can just stop.
Yeah.
She doesn't need to pump those feed. Yeah.
All right. Then we have another message. Somebody contacted me. I actually, from Sound Birthing, she was on the podcast talking about birth and pelvic stuff and a while back. And she sent me a message and she had information about, we were talking about papoose boards, remember?
Yeah.
In the dentist.
Yes, with the dentist.
Office. Yeah. So apparently, there's a little bit of confusion because there's like papoose, Papoose, which is what we are talking about. And then I think that comes from the word papusa, which is an indigenous infant board. So have you ever seen like little Native American indigenous babies kind of strapped to a board?
Yes. So that's pictures of that. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a cradle board, but that's called a papoose board. Okay. And so like we kind of co-opted, I guess, this word. It would have been nice if they had just called it something else because it's totally different. It's not, the medical world uses it in order to hold a baby still when there's a medical procedure necessary. So we were talking about it as far as like in dental work and talking about how absolutely disgusting that is, to fill a cavity and tying a baby down to a papoose board. But a papoose board has actual necessity in the medical world when a baby does need to have some sort of procedure done. I just thought that was interesting. And
it is interesting, the history of the word. Yeah.
Papoose boards are not just used in dentistry. They're used in medical world for that. But apparently the word comes from that cradle board used with indigenous babies.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah.
I wish they had just called it something else. Because then we wouldn't need to. It's not even the same thing.
I know. Yeah.
Anyway,
that's weird. Yeah.
Those are this week's messages, and we can get back to fussy babies.
So fast milk flow. So you see that sometimes babies can be fussy with a faster milk flow. So if you have, and I really only see like a fast milk flow if there's an oversupply. I think those two things go together pretty well.
Yeah.
And you might find that your milk comes down really fast. You might feel a pretty strong letdown. Your baby might like choke a little bit or cough or sputter with that letdown. They might come off and they might be fussy. And then you try to get them back on. And some babies handle it fine. Like some babies might go while they're feeding and just kind of like still continue on. And it doesn't really disrupt them at all. Some babies will come off and make a fuss. So if that's the case, take a minute, calm them, put them on your chest, calm them a little bit for a minute, let the milk, kind of flow out and just kind of slow down and then put them back on. But that might be something that your baby is reacting to if you do have that faster flow. You might get that baby. And that can make feedings miserable if you're like, So a couple of things that you can do for that is you can feed in a more reclined position. Like if you have, you can lean back on a couch. If you have a recliner, you can lean back on a recliner, a rocking chair, something like that. Just lean back with your baby. And you don't have to do the whole feed like that. You can wait until your letdown is over and then go back to feeding in a regular position if you want to. Feeding your baby more upright, that can be a better position. So it really, there's ways to control that overflow or that fast flow. But babies can become fussy with that as well. Now, I know we had mentioned when we were talking about doing this topic today, we talked about doing some like holiday fussiness too.
Yeah. Which you're going to see. If you have a baby and you're having holiday plans and you're going to go to like Christmas dinner or a New Year's gathering or something, your baby's just going to be fussy because it's exhausting and it's overstimulating.
Yeah. So,
and they might just not feed as well because as we know, babies feed worse the more tired they are. Right? Then they're just kind of like, they're so uncomfortable and they're so overtired that they might be popping on and off and acting like they can't settle down.
Now, if you are at a gathering with your baby and you are fine with nursing in public, that's great. But I would say in a situation like that where there is a lot of people, maybe, and your baby might be overstimulated and might be tired, I would say try to find a quiet room. See if your host can like let you into their bedroom or something like that where it's quiet and you can nurse the baby there, because they will, chances of them being more fussy and when they're out of their element like that can be pretty common.
Yeah, you can also get a carrier. Put them in a carrier, put them in a sling, or put them in a, one of those, any kind of carrier that you have. You should have one. You should absolutely have one of those. And if you don't, get it before the holidays. And although it's not, when is this episode going up?
It's going up next week. So it's right before the holidays.
Okay. So yeah, you're going to want to have one of those. And then you could just have the baby in there because people are like, pass the baby around. Let me hold the baby. Let's see the baby. And
fuck off,
you
people.
can just put them in the carrier. You can even get like a little receiving blanket and put it over the top. Some carriers have their own little cover, like I know the Ergo, a lot of those buckle carriers have like, you can unsnap it and fold it over the baby's head and snap it on the straps and it covers them completely.
Yeah.
And you could just be like, oh, sorry, baby's sleeping.
Yeah. Too bad.
And then you don't have to worry about any of that.
Yeah. People will expect you to pass your baby around.
They really will.
Which is kind of annoying. Who was it one time, I think, that told us, or maybe it was a client that I had, like she was at a wedding with her baby and like some perfect stranger was like, oh, can I hold the baby? Like that she had no idea who they were. And it's like people are insane. When
people are crazy. I know. on a couple of occasions, I've asked to hold someone's baby and not like I've offered to hold someone's baby. Like if I see them at Target and they've got like a toddler and a baby, I'm so nosy. I walk up and I'm like, do you want some help? I can like, you want me to hold the baby for a second? Usually they're like, no, I'm okay.
Yeah.
But demanding to hold somebody's baby is really weird.
I know.
It's really weird, but it doesn't matter because my parents were like this too when I first had Jack, especially. They just thought Jack was their baby. They were just like, oh, we had a baby. Oh, look. And then they would just take the baby and just do. And I'm like, you are not a part of this.
Yeah. My mom used to do that too with my first one.
I feel like grandparents are just, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I can see it, like thinking about like if Jack had a baby, but there would be another parent there that wasn't like directly my child.
Right.
And I'd be like, that's their baby too. And it feels like you're picking up, like I'm fine picking up Jack's property, but if it was also someone else's, it's kind of just like, I don't know why.
I know.
I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah. People are really weird when it comes to babies.
And you might have a family member who's just like totally out there and just grabbing the baby. Give me that baby.
Yeah. Yeah. People do it. Especially if it's like the first baby in the family or something like that. Like the first grandchild, the first one born. Yep. That's a lot of times you'll see that. And, you know, they can feel like maybe they think they're being helpful or whatever. But if you have them in a carrier, that is a little bit better because then they can't touch them. They can't be in your personal space. Like they'll do that less if you are. But if you're just holding them and you're trying to eat at the same time and it looks like you're trying to just balance this baby, then they might be like, oh, I'll take the baby.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, no. I'll keep my baby, thank you. I mean, it's really hard because holidays are like, the people expect you to have your baby there with you, and you expect to go to these holiday gatherings as a family, right? Like, if you leave the baby home with a babysitter, that's kind of, people are going to be like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
So you kind of, it's kind of
when
like,
you want to bring your baby, you're going to want to bring your baby, you know, you just don't want to have it. I mean, nobody would walk up to you and take your drink out of your hand or your phone out of your hand. Right. Just be like, let me see your phone. But they'll take a whole baby out of your hands.
People are crazy. They really are.
Seriously.
So don't hesitate to be like, no, we're good. Like you can, you know, but keeping them in a carrier can really help a lot.
Yeah.
And then we do have...
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, we do have episodes about how to breastfeed in a carrier too. So that way you can nurse the baby.
You don't even ever have to take them out.
Yeah.
If you don't want to.
Yeah, just nurse them there. Just keep them in the carrier. It's the best thing to do.
Yes. Well, thank you for listening, everybody.
Thank you.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. See ya in 2025.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.